Welcome to our fall program at the East Long Meadow Historical Commission. I want to thank the Senior Center for hosting us here, and thank Don Mackey for coming down from LCAT to film. There's 3 seats in the front row if you want to come in.
I know, front row's scary. I might make you do something.
We usually have 2 programs every year. Our spring program we did on Riverside Park, which was great, and we're hoping to see that on LCAT. And if you want to join the Friends of the Historical Commission, you'll get a newsletter every year, this time of year, telling you what the fall program is. And there's some of these at the back table if you want to join. It's $10 for an individual and $25 for a family if you want to join.
15 for a family group.
Excuse me, 15 for a family. It's a discount. We're very pleased to be able to bring this program tonight. Linda Abrahms is extremely busy. We've been trying to get this together for a couple of years now. And there's a obscure story about the Hunley having to do with East Long Meadow. She might not even know. I've heard of this.
God.
But it may lead us to a claim to fame one day. The rumor or the story was that one of the crew members might have been a runaway quarry worker from East Long Meadow. And the other rumor story was that one of the crew members might be the ostracized man that designed the rotary. So if she finds out this to be true,
Oh, no.
she'll let.
Oh, I have to do that research?
Well, would you please give a warm welcome to Linda Abrahms? One other thing, she's curator of the Stores Museum in Long Meadow, and her mother was Mabel.
Mabel.
She was the curator for years over there.
Yeah.
Linda wears many hats, and if you want to go to the Stores Museum, she'll be the one to give you the history.
And tonight's our annual meeting.
She's supposed to be there.
I'm supposed to be there, but guess what? I'm here.
Don't tell anyone.
I know.
Okay, thank you, Linda. All right, can we give her another hand here?
Oh, my God. Okay. Hello, I hope you all can hear me. I was a cheerleader in junior high, and I still talk loud. So, and now my husband is hard of hearing, so it works out for all of us. So who am I? We just had a reunion 2 weekends ago from my Long Meadow High School class in Long Meadow, and it was so interesting that we more talked about our junior high school when we didn't know who we were and what we were doing, and that explains, I think, why I live in the past. I really love researching in the past. And with our little high school reunion we just had from our class, we all talked about the past, you know, over 50 years ago, and I loved it because I live in the past. Interesting how our Yankee information for the Civil War, what we learned. And here I am working on a Confederate Civil War project. So what did we learn? We learned the Merrimack and the Monitor. We learned Sherman's March to the Sea, slavery, Ulysses Grant, Lincoln, Gettysburg. What an eye-opener for me it became when I was asked to help with this Confederate case. Me, this Yankee. And when the Pentagon, who I work for the Army, called me and said, "We have a call from the Hunley. Are you interested?" And I'm like, "What's the Hunley?" And they're like, "This Confederate Civil War submarine found in Charleston Harbor." I'm like, well, maybe. And the next phone call a few minutes later was from the Hunley Commission. Will you help us identify the remains of the crew that we believe are on this Confederate submarine that have just been raised? So I thought, as a genealogist, and I thought 1864, and I'm like, who were these guys? And they're like, well, they were good old Southern boys. They were on this Confederate submarine, young guys. They volunteered. And I thought, well, the 1860 census is online. This should be a piece of cake. Well, not. Here we are, more than 10 years later, and I'm still working on this same case. So the Hunley, and it's fun that I'm giving this talk, thank you, Bruce, here in my neck of the woods on the Hunley. This is the first time I've given a talk on the Hunley, in Yankee territory, right? So the Hunley, and it's hunley.org. Hunley.org, those of you who are computer literate and you want to look it up. The Hunley was what the Confederacy hoped would be their secret weapon against Yankee ships. Again, so fun as a Yankee working on this kind of a project. However, so what happened was they developed a little tiny place in Mobile, Alabama, and they, out of boiler, this is a replica. Right here is a replica. So out of boiler plates, they created this little experimental craft that they hoped would be a way to sink a Yankee ship and cause the Yankees to scurry away. Unfortunately, because it was so experimental, several crews drowned. When you think in the 1860s, trying to create a vessel that could submerge and raise, pretty experimental. Once Farragut came into New Orleans and Mobile Harbor was considered not a place that they could attempt what they wanted to do, they then shipped it to Charleston, South Carolina. If you remember Gone with the Wind and the blockade runners, and I know more about all that than I ever thought I would ever know. Clark Gable, and the blockade runners and, the black ships sneaking in and out. But seriously, what was happening is Europe was supporting the Confederacy because Europe was getting the cotton and the rice from the South. And they thought that this Civil War would end up with our country split, and so Europe wanted to be aligned with the South. So that's where the South was getting many of their armament and other supplies they needed to continue with their threat of the Northern aggression. So what happened was when they decided to bring this experimental vessel to Charleston, because Charleston Harbor was one of the last harbors that the blockade runners were coming in and going out and coming in and going out. It's a very shallow harbor. So they felt if they could sink a Yankee ship, that would cause all the Yankee fleet to scurry away. So what happened was this vessel, now having sunk several times, drowning these poor volunteers that had volunteered to serve on it. It wasn't a bona fide, legitimate military vessel. Even though it's now known as the CSS Hunley, it really was made up of volunteer crews. So the last crew, the final crew, was mobilized from various Confederate soldiers and seamen that happened to be in Charleston looking for an opportunity to further the cause of the Confederacy. So the first person, George Dixon, and I'm going to hand you, and I'll talk about him as this circulates around the room. This isn't his actual, obviously, it's a replica. My God, his actual is probably in 3 safe deposit boxes. But George Dixon volunteered. He was an infantry officer from Alabama, but not from Alabama. But he was in the 21st Alabama. He was wounded at Shiloh. And when he was wounded, he got shot in the hip. And there was a legend that he had this gold coin in his pocket. And when he was shot, that shot deflected the bullet that probably would have killed him. And that's a replica of the gold coin found in his pocket when his remains were recovered from the submarine. So that's like, there are so many things. If you go on Hunley.org, you're going to find that there is someone who thinks a sweetheart gave it to him. But if you look closely, there's a legend on that coin. And it says at Shiloh, my lifesaver, my life preserver. And I'm thinking if this so-called sweetheart had given this to him, he would have put her name on it. I mean, if I gave a guy a coin and it saved his life, and then he engraved it, he better put my name on there. Hello. And so there's a lot of stories about the fact that she supposedly gave him this coin. But this George Dixon stepped up and said he would command this submarine that had already drowned over 20 guys. And he said, he'll get a crew. These guys won't drown. I know what I'm doing. I was in Mobile. I saw it being built. I know how to move it. I know what the conning towers will do. I know how to submerge it, how to raise it. So he went aboard a training ship in Charleston, and he found some crews who said, okay, we'll sign on, we'll sign on, we'll sign on. And he got a crew. It was at first 8 guys, and then it became 7 guys, including himself. Back to what I told you in the beginning, when they lured me into this project, they made me think these were 8 young Southern guys. I would find them in a heartbeat on the 1860 census. I would know who they were. I would find them. When they raised, and after they found the submarine, which was Clive Cussler, if you know Clive Cussler, the author, who likes to hunt for things, underwater things, he financed the search for the Hunley, which took over 10 years in this enormous harbor. And they did a grid of the whole harbor, and he commissioned a boat to go up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down until they finally found what they believed were the Hunley. It wasn't raised until the year 2000. However, he felt as though they were indeed Southern guys. So when they raised it, and then they opened it and they found the remains of 8 guys, and an anthropologist from Smithsonian named Doug Owsley was involved, and he took these are complete skeletons. These skeletons were complete. They were not just a bone here and a foot there. They were all in place, as they call situ, and they were all in place. And when he took out remains, it was like 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, and he called me and he said, I have bad news. 4 of them are foreign born. I'm like, wait a minute. I was led to believe these guys are all like young Southern guys. What are you talking? What do you mean foreign? What's that mean, foreign born? Europe? You mean Europe? Well, guess what? When you were a child in America in the 1800s, you were on a diet that was made up of corn-fed animals, likely. So in your teeth, back then, there is evidence of corn. Well, in Europe, they had no corn. So when you look at the teeth of 8 guys who died in 1864, it's like, it's that scientist stuff, where they can pull a tooth and go, oh yeah, corn, and then they pull something else, no corn. They then knew that 4 of these guys had never had corn as an infant, because when you're an infant, your adult teeth are developing. And that's where you were corn-fed, not that you gnawed on an ear of corn, but it meant that you ate animals that were corn-fed. And that leaves proof. That leaves proof in your teeth. So, you might not know that, but, So whenever he told me 4 of these guys were foreign born, I'm like, I'm done. I've had it. I'm not going. What are you talking? Foreign? However, of course, I kept going. And the fun thing was, if any of you has done family research or genealogy, we're talking about people whose trails ended in 1864. So it isn't like doing my roots and my parents and my grandparents, etc. We're talking about somebody who died in 1864. So you have to start there and go backwards. I found interesting evidence on some of these guys, because when you look at the fact that they died in 1864, what are we looking at for records? However, knowing that they were all volunteers and they were all military, I had to try to find their original, where did they come from? So what that led me to, and I hope you'll appreciate this story, even though it's almost Halloween. One of the guys, I tracked his sister to her death in a cemetery in Pennsylvania. He was from the eastern shore of Maryland. So I went through all the business to open up her grave. Yeah, to extract something to make a DNA match. And indeed we did. That was Joseph Ridgway. We opened up her grave and we found not much left. Her beautiful black silk gown, but not much left of her remains. But they were able to get a little piece of her jaw, and that was enough to make a positive ID that matched Joseph Ridgway. The next grave we dug up, I know. I mean, is this perfect before Halloween? I love it, right? The next grave we dug up, I had believed that this would lead us to another member of the crew. But unfortunately, the information was a little iffy. But we decided to go ahead anyway. So this guy would have been a son of a sister of the guy that I was hoping to ID. He was buried in Pittsburgh. And if you remember, Pittsburgh was ahead of all of us with steel mills and everything. And he was buried in the 1920s. I mean, we went through all the permission and all that, to open up this thing and, So with Smithsonian's help, anthropologists and archaeologists and everybody, I'm just a genealogist. And so we have the backhoe there, and they open up the grave, and then they lift off the top of the crypt. And it's a steel crypt, which is interesting because we weren't doing steel crypts until almost the 1940s. So it was a steel crypt up, and there's a steel coffin. So they had to lift that up, and there was this guy laying there, perfectly preserved. And actually his head was turned toward us, and we're low, and it looked like he was smiling. And he had this beautiful brown pinstripe suit on. And actually we had National Geographic was doing the photo of that particular uncovery. And so now the anthropologist is going to get down there, and he's got his white suit on all the way head to toe. He's covered because when you do DNA, you can't have your DNA being part of this guy's DNA. So he gets all down there, and there he is. And because the lid of the coffin was hinged, they put a bucket on either end to prop it up. So now here's this guy down there, and he wants to get a tooth, because that's really all you need is a tooth. And he puts his hand in the guy's mouth, and he goes, "False teeth." Oh my God. So he leans up to one of the guys helping him, and he goes, "I need a bone saw." And I'm like, do I want to be part of this, right? So they hand down a bone saw, and he goes to his thigh area, and he's, right through the brown striped suit, right through it, because you can get DNA out of a big bone, since the teeth, All of a sudden, when he's sawing through the guy's leg kicks up. And it kicks the bucket. And it falls on top of this guy from Smithsonian. And we're all laughing. And somebody's going like this to National Geographic, who's trying to do this very serious kind of thing. And we're cracking up. Meanwhile, the guy in the white thing is halfway out of this, lift the lid. He goes, lift the lid. So this guy kicked the bucket twice, right? So they got the lid back up, and he kept sawing, and he got a little piece of the guy's thigh bone, and we were able to make a positive ID. So, I mean, that was very hilarious, because the guy that I had to get permission from to do this was not in favor of us opening up a grave of his relative who had died in the 1920s. So I went back into the history of the family, and I found another guy who was a little older than that guy. And he goes, yeah, no problem, go for it. So we got all the documents. Well, it turns out the first guy who said no just lived right up the road from where we are with the backhoe and the big pile of dirt. And it turned out to be so close to the road. However, when we did all that and we filled in the thing and all of that, it was in February. That night it snowed. So if that guy had driven by, it would just have looked like a normal kind of thing. You know, the snow just totally covered that whole grave. Anyway, I loved that. I mean, I loved it. I have no idea what National Geographic, because we were like, don't do that, because we're laughing. I mean, how bad can that be? We're standing there laughing when the guy's leg came up. And they said it was like a tendon that just let go, you know, from the 1920s. Dunk, up it came. So it's interesting with these 4 foreign-born guys that I have now made several trips overseas trying to find who these other guys are, even though we've buried the crew of the 8 that perished. Only 3 do we know who they are. I mean, I guess I'll be doing this, you know, until I'm up there. Because the foreign guys are they're really a challenge. What I learned, and I actually went to Bermuda on the dime, can you imagine? I have to go to Bermuda to do research. Oh, yeah, okay. You know. I loved it when I told my husband, you know, I'm going to Bermuda, I have to do some research. He goes, yeah, right. Well, it turns out because Europe, again, supporting the Confederacy, what happened was these big ships from Europe were sailing either into Bermuda or into the Bahamas, loaded with goods to support the Confederacy. And then the Clark Gable that I told you about, those little blockade runners, are scooting out of these southern harbors to Bermuda and to Nassau to offload these goods and support the Confederacy. So it occurred to me, maybe there's some good stuff in Bermuda. And sure enough, on the pretense I'm just going there for research, even though I took a cruise ship to get there. But, you know, I get there and there's 2 museums in Bermuda. And sure enough, did I not find one of the guys that perished on the Hunley? He had come in on a ship from Europe to Bermuda in a big ship. They offloaded the goods. And then they would wait to either get back to Europe or maybe they could take on as a crew on one of these smaller little blockade runners running into Wilmington and Charleston and Savannah. So you have all these guys milling around in the area they call St. George, and they got in trouble with the local law enforcement, hitting up the local women, you know, or in the pubs, and I found him. And when I found him, I was so excited because when you do research of people you think came from Europe to America, you automatically look at the immigration lists. You look at the, you know, the bona fide immigration lists. And I couldn't find these guys on the immigration lists. And I'm like, how did they get from there to here? And then I found out they were supporting the Confederacy, like this guy Carlson. So I have now been twice in Europe looking for him, or looking for his family, in order to trace his family to somebody I can either find buried and open that grave, although in Europe they don't do their graves like we do here. But hopefully I will find him, because even though we buried the 8 crew, only 3 of them do we know who they are. If you like to go on to Hunley.org, there is a publication. The membership is, I'm not here to sell anything, but it's called The Blue Light. They're periodical. And when you go to Charleston, it's interesting when they talk about the blue light, because both of these conning towers that could open, and the Hunley went out every night trying to see how close they could get to a Yankee ship, and then safely make it back to their place called Breach Inlet in Charleston Harbor. And the deal was, if they were ready to come back, Dixon stood up in this conning tower and he showed a blue light. And then the guys on shore would see that blue light, they would show a light, and all those guys could get back to where they were supposed to be. So the mystery on the loss of the Hunley was the guys on shore that would wait to see the blue light said they saw a blue light after they had put this torpedo into the side of the Hunley. I mean, the side of the Housatonic, by the way. That Housatonic was built in Boston. Again, my Yankee roots, right? So when they jammed this thing into the side of this big Yankee ship, they just happened to hit the magazine of the Yankee ship. And when they yanked the rope back and it exploded, the ship totally exploded, this Housatonic with hundreds of men on board, except Charleston Harbor is only about 30 feet deep. So this ship went thunk, and all those 300 guys, except for 5, climbed up into the rigging. And, you know, they were safe, but the ship sunk. So the record shows that the guys back in Breach Inlet saw a blue light. So they lit their light to guide the Hunley back to shore. And the Hunley never made it. So the idea then during the Civil War, the end of the Civil War, was they were captured, they were killed, they tried to swim to shore. What happened to them? Maybe when the Housatonic blew up, they got sucked underneath, and that's where they were. And so it went on until, you know, the 1990s, when Clive Cussler commissioned a search, gridding that whole harbor, because he believed that it was somewhere out there in the harbor. And it's so fun to talk to the guys who were part of that. I mean, they're just local fishermen that were commissioned. And when you talk to them, every summer they're out there following the grid, and then I'm talking a 30-foot deep harbor, max. So they would then dive down if they got a ping for some sort of a metallic anomaly, and they would dive down and they'd come back up and go, yeah, no, that's not it. And they'd keep going and they'd keep going. And then finally one day, one of the guys dove down, he came back up and said, no, that's not it. And they said, yeah, but the length seems right. And this other guy goes, I'm going down. And he goes down, and it was sunk into the sand. And he runs his hand along the top of this metallic anomaly, and then boom, he finds one of these towers, and he keeps going, and he finds another one. And he comes back up and he goes, we got it, we got it, we got it. It took them 5 years before they raised it, because they had to figure out the funding, interestingly enough, because this belonged to the Confederacy and the Confederacy was seen as an enemy of the United States, it is not in the property of the U.S. It became the property of the state of South Carolina because it was considered an enemy. So that's why now it resides in a tank, a special tank, in Charleston, South Carolina, on the old Navy base, and it'll eventually be in a museum. So it's been interesting, me working on this project, and I'm still on it. So I want to give you a chance to ask me some questions.
How long is this?
What?
How long is this submarine?
About 33 feet, maybe?
Feet?
Yeah,
Not including the,
yeah.
Smithsonian had a big article on that
The what?
a few years ago.
You went down there?
No, Smithsonian
No.
had a big article.
Oh, yeah, right.
And I've seen it
Oh,
on
there's the
TV.
coin. Did you see the coin yet?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Did you tell them how it was propelled?
Well, I know, oh my God, these guys doing this?
Right.
Are you kidding me? I mean, they have a replica down there at the lab in Charleston, and you see how these guys are sitting in there, you know, like this, right? And this, the thing of it is, the way it could lower was to fill these ballast tanks with water. And then to raise, there were guys on either end who could pump out that water in the ballast tanks. But if it didn't sink equally, which is what happened to a couple of the first crews, and the ballast tanks were not secure. They were open at the top. So if it went down like that, you know, blub, 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 right? So, saw a question?
Did you start off with a list of the 8 names? Did you know the names of the?
Actually, the official records of the Civil War, there were some telegrams that had gone back and forth at the time. It's a published volume of things, this official ORs of the Civil War. Unfortunately, 2 weeks before it was lost, Dixon had to give up 2 crew members to go back to Mobile to work on like a Gatling gun, and he had to suddenly find 2 more guys to fill the crank positions. So one of the guys we know, the other one we may never know. But yeah, I mean, there's some documentation of who that final volunteer crew were made up of.
Are there any remains of the ship that blew up at the time it sunk? The Housatonic. Are there any remains left?
Of the ship?
Of the other one. The Housatonic.
Actually, after the war, which is another reason they thought the Hunley was long gone, they decided to dredge a channel through Charleston Harbor so it could become a commercial thing. And as a result, what was left of the Housatonic, they kept blowing it up and blowing it up and blowing it up so it wouldn't be a problem for ships coming through the harbor.
Now, who were the 3 guys you identified?
The 3?
Yeah, the 2 from Pittsburgh or 2 from,
Dixon, and the only reason that we know who he was is because he had a lot of name-associated artifacts on him. And even, I mean, believe it or not, 130 plus years underwater, you could still see his gray Confederate coat was still on his remains. But he had a watch, he had a pocket watch, he had that gold coin. You know, there were lots with him. My hunch on him, even though I haven't found his family, I have no doubt he came from the north. He was a steamboat engineer on the Mississippi. And again, when I said that I started in 1864 with these guys, because that's when they were killed, and worked backwards, I found he was on the Mississippi River at the same time as Mark Twain. Oh my God. So I even got that damn Life on the Mississippi, and I read that, which is not an easy read, that book, if you've ever read it, thinking maybe it'll mention Dixon. You know, it didn't, you know. But he was a steamboat engineer. I got a steamboat engineer's license from St. Louis in 1859, and I found out the steamboat he was working on was called the Flirt. Would you love that or what? And then I actually found the boarding house that he lived in Mobile. He lived in a boarding house before he went to Charleston. After he didn't come back, and I went to the courthouse, I got everything in Mobile. The boarding house guy goes to the courthouse and says, this guy didn't come back, what do I do with his things? And the judge said, try to find his family. So the guy comes back 2 years later, 1866, and says, can't find his family, what do I do now? And the judge goes, have an auction. And I found that in the newspaper late at night in Mobile, going through all that microfilm, where it posted all of his possessions to be auctioned off. So when I saw this guy had 6 bolts of gray cashmere, 8 white dress shirts, all this good stuff. Then, when I found he was on this steamboat called the Flirt, and he was a steamboat engineer, I found that steamboat also had a casino and a bartender. So this wasn't just your cotton bale kind of steamboat. This guy was one dandy, you know. He had all that cashmere and those dress shirts and all of that when he was working on the Mississippi. So I just gotta tell you, you know, as this Yankee from Longmeadow, it's been a hoot working on a Confederate case. And the Confederacy and the South will rise again, and the War of Northern Aggression. And it's true, there were a couple places I did research down south, and they did not want to cooperate. Hard as I tried to go, hi y'all, I couldn't pull it off. I couldn't say hi y'all. So can I look at hi y'all, look at your records, you know. No, it sounded more like somebody from a trailer court, you know. I just couldn't do it. And they saw right through me. And some of them were not cooperative. They were not cooperative. Give me a break. You know. Question back here.
How come the Confederacy still had so much power through all this length of time gone by?
Well,
And they still had power?
the Confederacy was trying to accomplish what they wanted to do.
And they were still able to continue on?
Well, they still want to today, I'm telling you. It's still down there, you know.
I'm getting to believe it.
The South will rise again. And it's funny, they do a reenactment every February of when the Hunley was sank, and I went to one of those a few years ago. And here I am with these colleagues. Again, this goes back to our schooling, but here I am with all these colleagues that I've worked with, the archaeologists and the thing, and we're doing this thing, and they had a fake blue light out there and reenacting. We're looking at the Hunley coming in, and then all of a sudden they broke into Dixie. I wish I was in the land. And I know the words, and they're looking at me because they think I'm a Yankee. But we learned those. Like the Erie Canal, all those songs we learned as kids. I wish I was in the land of Dixie. And I was able to sing all the words. And I guess that was America for us back in our school days. Anyway, more questions? I don't want to keep you guys. It's late, right? On this beautiful night.
I have 2 questions.
Oh.
One is when they raised the Hunley.
Yeah.
Were they able to find out why it never returned?
Oh, see, this is a great question.
And the other
And second
could
one,
you tell us a little your background? How did you,
me, my background?
yeah, how did you get in? I mean, what is your background? Went to school, and how did you do this? Why did you-
Eileen, they want my background. Well, the first question, I was there after they raised the Hunley, to answer your first one. They weren't sure how to even, I mean, it came up out of, the sand and everything, and there it was in the lab in a solution. And so they decided, after they did some x-rays or gamma rays, to just cut out, cut out a piece on the top here that they could see had nothing important right under that part. And just yeah. So I was there when that happened, and so they do it and they lift it up and they're like, my God, what's that? And it was like this black sludge. It was like black sludge, because even though there were a couple of holes in the Hunley, not big holes, a couple of holes, over those 130 years, sand had come in and forced out the water, and then the iron had turned the sand black. So we're like, what is this? It was like a black, in a horror movie, it was like this black sludge. And it was only later when I got home that they called me and said, we found a bone. So back I went. And my background? You don't want my background.
I mean, why did they call you? What was your job? What? You Googled. Let me answer the question.
I work for the Army. As a forensic genealogist, I identify remains that are recovered from World War II in Korea. And so I'm known out there, not locally, thank goodness, but out there. And so what happened when they raised this, I mean, we didn't even know about it. They couldn't believe it when I got down there, and they're like, didn't you know about it? And I'm like, I don't know. If it was on CNN, I guess I missed it. I mean, that was Southern news, right? And so when I got down there, and they're like, so you're going to help us out here? And I'm like, well, I'll try, let's see what you all know. But the problem is, the Hunley Commission had called the Pentagon, who I work for and still work for, identifying remains of World War II Korea. And that goes back to my other life. Anyway, so they had called the Pentagon and said, so when you're identifying remains of somebody from World War II, who do you call? And they said, Linda Abrahms, Longmeadow, Mass. So the Pentagon called me and said, be prepared for a phone call from the Hunley. And I'm like, what's the Hunley? Duh. So that's how I got involved, because I have done work for the Pentagon for like 20 years. So identifying remains, I just did one for Guadalcanal. You might have seen it in the paper today with the guy, Korea, in Leominster.
Boston Globe.
Yep. So,
It was in the Boston.
any more questions? Aren't you guys thirsty? Don't you want snacks? I see cookies and cider. And no more
The guy was
questions?
63 years old.
You are?
No, the guy who was in the Boston Globe, who you identified.
Oh, from Korea.
Korea,
Yeah.
yeah, 63 years ago.
To Fresno
He
or
was buried
something.
today.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know all about it. Yeah.
Well, no, it was just in the paper.
Can I stop? Merle, hi. How are you? Good. Good. Any more? No.
Linda,
Oh, we're done, right? No.
this is a model of the
You
Hunley.
already had a question.
What made it sink? The explosion, concussion from the the bomb that they had on the front when it hit the wooden ship?
Actually, because the guys died in position, they think that they died because they ran out of air. They did not die because they drowned. They did not die from the explosion.
Oh, okay.
The perception is because they were all in position,
Yep.
that they were patient because they had experimented sinking, raising, sinking,
That's right,
raising.
that's right.
So they thought that they were getting away,
Back
as they're
it down,
trying to
right,
get away.
Right.
Because they were found not by that ship that sunk. They were a distance away. So the thing is, they just didn't surface. But they
Gotcha.
were in position. They were following orders.
That's right. Okay,
And
that's what I understood,
Yep.
when I seen that documentary.
Yeah,
Yep.
did you? Yeah.
Very
good.
interesting.
Linda,
Are we all done?
this is a model of the Hunley, and would you explain, this is something you can purchase the model of. Would you just give
Well,
an idea of how they might be
Well,
able to-
I mean, yeah, the Hunley.org, in Charleston, I mean, they have an interesting gift shop. I mean, they have these replicas of the coin in Dixon's pocket when he was shot at Shiloh. They have those and lots of, all the stupid stuff like shirts and sweatshirts. But, they have these things that you can purchase and then you can assemble them. I know.
How would they?
But that's what it
how would
looks
they
like.
go to get one?
Hunley.org.
Okay.
Just simply Hunley.org.
I have one final question.
You don't have to send them a lot of membership money.
What were they using for oxygen when they were down there?
What?
What were they using for oxygen for breathing?
Well, the question is, what were they using for oxygen for breathing? They had determined that they could stay below for 2 hours. They had already tested that, and they had candles. It's like the canaries in the cave and the thing. So they had candles. And if the candles started to flicker, then they knew they had to go up. So it really is a prototype to submarines. I mean, it's amazing that they could actually totally submerge.
But where were they taking in the air from?
You took it on the surface and then you sunk.
And just inside, what was inside? I mean, look at us in the winter. Do we have all our windows closed in the thing? I mean, how are we surviving? Right? I mean, right? We cranking all the windows? Any more questions? No, you want
None of
snacks.
this technology is still used today on submarines. That's how high-tech this was in its
Well,
day.
yeah, it's amazing. It's been fun. I mean, I don't know anything about anything. And it's so been fun to work on a project where I'm just a genealogist, I find families for whatever reason, and I'm working with these people that have 3 PhDs, they're archaeologists and anthropologists, and one of them said, we all end with a gist, because I'm a genealogist, so, but it's been a hoot. I mean, it's really, it's, how much can you absorb? But it's been fun, and I love it. You guys are a great group. Thank you so much. Thank you.